They thought the disrespect would break you. What they didn't realize is they handed you the closure you were too loyal to seek for yourself. That aha moment, they dismissed your worth, mocked your silence, or minimized your pain. That was the turning point. That wasn't rejection, it was redirection. That was life screaming, stop waiting for validation from people who don't even value themselves. Disrespect wasn't just a moment of pain, it was your awakening. You see, we often wait for neat endings, closure, wrapped in apologies, truth told in full honesty, and hearts handed back to us with grace. But life isn't neat. People aren't always kind. Some walk away without a word. Others stay and slowly kill your spirit through manipulation, criticism, or silence. And still, you kept showing up, giving them the benefit of the doubt, lowering your voice so theirs could be heard, shrinking your light so they could feel comfortable in their shadow. And what did it cost you? Your peace, your self-respect, your identity. But here's the truth you've been avoiding. Disrespect was the closure, not because you deserved it, but because it exposed everything you refused to see. Disrespect is often seen as an insult, a wound to the ego, or an attack on our value. But in truth, it can be one of the most powerful forms of closure life gives us. It's the moment when a person stops pretending, the mask drops, and they reveal their true colors. And while it stings, while it shakes our core and makes us question everything, it also answers the questions we were too afraid to ask. We often search for closure in conversations, in apologies, in explanations. We believe that if we could just understand why someone treated us poorly, if they could just acknowledge the pain they caused, we'd be able to move on. But that's the trap. Waiting for people who don't respect you to suddenly start caring enough to give you peace. Most of the time, the peace doesn't come from them, it comes from what their behavior reveals. When someone disrespects you, they aren't just being unkind. They're showing you exactly how they view you, how they value you, and what space you hold in their life. And that realization, while painful, is the answer. That's the closure. The door doesn't need to be slammed with a grand farewell. Often it ends in silence, or worse, with words and actions that leave you feeling worthless. But what if that was the message all along? Not that you are worthless, but that you were giving your time, energy, and love to someone who never truly saw your worth. Disrespect is the universe's way of redirecting you. It's life saying, you've gone far enough down this path. It's time to turn around. And yet, many of us resist. We keep trying. We keep giving. We hope that one more act of kindness, one more chance, one more conversation might fix things. But disrespect is not an accident. It's a deliberate behavior that communicates a lack of regard. It strips away illusions. It tears through the fantasy we built about who someone was. And once it happens, you can't unsee it. That moment when they raise their voice, when they ignore your needs, when they mock your pain or act like your presence is disposable, that moment is clarity. That moment is telling you this person does not value you the way you value them. And that hurts, not because it's surprising, but because deep down you knew, you felt it. But you kept hoping it was just a bad day, that they'd change, that things would go back to how they used to be. The reality is, disrespect is a door that closes with finality. It doesn't always come with dramatic exits or loud fights. Sometimes it's subtle, a pattern of neglect, a buildup of little dismissals, a refusal to listen, a lack of effort. And slowly, you begin to shrink. You question yourself. You walk on eggshells. You lower your standards in the name of peace. But peace built on silence and suppression isn't peace at all. It's self-abandonment. And eventually you break, not because you're weak, but because your soul has had enough. Disrespect reaches a point where it can no longer be ignored. It becomes undeniable. It becomes the answer you were looking for, not the answer you wanted, but the one you needed. What makes disrespect such a powerful closure is that it ends the fantasy. It cuts through the confusion. It removes the what-ifs and replaces them with truth. And while truth hurts, it also frees, Because once you see someone clearly, you can stop making excuses for them. You can stop hoping they'll return as someone new. You can stop negotiating with your own value to fit into spaces that were never built for you. Disrespect gives you that freedom. It's the fire that burns down the illusion and leaves behind ashes of clarity. And in those ashes, something new can grow. Self-worth, self-respect, boundaries, strength. You learn to say, this is not love. This is not friendship. This is not alignment. You learn to walk away, not with anger, but with acceptance. Because now you know. You know that you don't need to wait for their explanation. Their silence was the response. Their cruelty was the message. You stayed out of love, not weakness. That distinction is crucial because so many people confuse a tender heart for a fragile one. But the truth is, staying in a difficult situation, continuing to give when you're receiving nothing, holding on when every part of you is breaking, none of that comes from weakness. It comes from the depth of your love. It comes from a heart that genuinely wanted to see the good in someone, to believe in a connection, to hold on to hope when logic was telling you to let go. You gave chances not because you didn't know your worth, but because you hoped they would eventually see it too. That's not weakness. That's the kind of love this world rarely understands. But here's the problem. Love without boundaries becomes self-destruction. When you give without limits to someone who doesn't value you, you're not just loving them, you're losing yourself in the process. It starts small. You forgive the first time, even when they didn't ask. You make excuses for them when they don't show up. You tolerate the coldness, the silence, the inconsistency because you remember who they used to be. You tell yourself they're just going through something, that they'll come back around, that the love you give will remind them of who they are. But over time, you begin to disappear. Not all at once, slowly, piece by piece. You stop speaking up because it only leads to arguments. You stop asking for the little things because you don't want to seem needy. You start to feel like a burden in the very space where you once felt safe. And before you know it, you're walking on eggshells, begging for scraps of the love you used to be showered with. Still you stay. Because you think love means enduring. You think loyalty means never leaving. You think strength is about holding on. But what you don't see in those moments is how much strength it takes to let go. How much power there is in choosing yourself. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away. Not out of anger, not out of spite, but because you've realized your love deserves to be met with respect, effort, and care. Not just received when it's convenient. You stayed because you were hopeful. You believed that if you just loved them harder, gave them more time, poured more of yourself in, things would change. That belief doesn't make you foolish. It makes you human. It means your heart is wired for connection, for compassion, for patience. But even the strongest heart has limits. Even the most giving soul must be protected. Because love that constantly demands your sacrifice but never offers security in return is not love. It's emotional exploitation. And the more you give without receiving, the more you teach yourself that your needs don't matter, that your voice isn't important, that being loved means being hurt. That's the most dangerous lesson of all. You didn't stay because you lacked options. You didn't stay because you didn't know better. You stayed because you cared deeply, because you saw the potential in someone, because you valued the bond. But potential is not a promise. And love cannot survive in a place where one person is carrying the weight for two. There's nothing admirable about suffering silently. There's nothing honorable in staying in a place that's killing your spirit. And eventually you reach a point where love demands a choice, not between them and someone else, but between them and yourself. Do you continue to love someone who is hurting you, or do you finally love yourself enough to walk away? You stayed out of love, but now you leave out of strength. You loved them with all you had, but now you're learning to love yourself with the same intensity. And maybe they'll never understand that. Maybe they'll call you cold. Maybe they'll accuse you of giving up. But only you know how long you fought. Only you know how many nights you cried, how many moments you doubted your sanity, how often you held back your own needs to protect theirs. You don't need to justify your journey to anyone. The fact that you stayed as long as you did shows your capacity for love. The fact that you're choosing to walk away now shows your capacity for growth. One does not cancel out the other. You can love someone and still realize they are not good for you. You can be kind and still know when enough is enough. Disrespect exposes truth in a way that few things can. It cuts through the mask people wear, the charm they use to impress, and the words they speak to manipulate. When someone no longer feels the need to impress you, when they think they have you wrapped up or emotionally locked in, that's when their real self begins to surface. That's when the subtle digs come out, the dismissive tone replaces the sweet words, and their actions begin to contradict everything they once claimed to be. It's not an accident. It's the truth revealing itself. People don't change into someone new. They simply stop pretending to be someone they never were. And it's in these moments, painful as they may be, that you're finally handed clarity you couldn't see before. So many people walk around confused about why they were treated the way they were. They keep asking what went wrong, what they did, what they lacked, but most of the time the answer lies in the disrespect itself. It wasn't about your worth. It was about their inability to maintain the facade. They showed you who they were not when things were good, but when the pressure hit, when control was no longer theirs, when they no longer saw a benefit in treating you well. Disrespect isn't just a bad habit. It's an intentional act. It says, I no longer need to hide who I truly am, and what often follows is a storm of emotional carelessness, manipulation, blame shifting, or cold indifference. And while you're left shocked by the sudden change, what you're actually witnessing is not a change, it's an unveiling. The most dangerous people aren't always the loud ones. Sometimes it's the ones who played the perfect role for just long enough to earn your trust. They made you feel safe, seen, special. But those moments were investments, not affection. And once they believed they had secured your loyalty, they stopped maintaining the image. That's when the truth breaks through. Their kindness fades into control. Their attention turns into criticism. Their support becomes conditional, and every day you're faced with a new version of them that doesn't align with the person you thought you knew, but instead of questioning them, you start questioning yourself. That's what disrespect does. It confuses your spirit while trying to protect your loyalty. You don't realize at first that you're witnessing the truth. You want to believe it's just stress or a bad day or temporary frustration. You try to justify their behavior because the version of them you knew couldn't possibly do these things. But eventually, the patterns become clear. The apologies become hollow. The warmth becomes calculated. And you begin to understand that the person you're dealing with is not someone you misjudged, but someone who was hiding. The disrespect wasn't a mistake. It was a revelation. It showed you exactly who they are when there's no need to perform. And that's the gift, even if it comes wrapped in pain, because once the truth comes out, you're no longer chasing a dream. You're no longer building your future with a lie. Disrespect is the moment you stop fantasizing about potential and start seeing reality. It's a turning point that forces you to decide, do I continue to ignore what's in front of me, or do I accept the truth and choose myself? That choice is never easy, especially when you're emotionally invested, but clarity is the first step to healing, and disrespect is often the very thing that opens your eyes. It doesn't matter how long you knew them, how many good times you shared, or how deeply you cared. When someone shows you their lack of respect, you are witnessing their true values. You're witnessing their capacity for empathy, for accountability, for compassion. And if those things are absent, then love cannot survive in that space. Truth always rises, and while it may shatter your heart in the process, it also sets you free, as once you see someone clearly, you can no longer pretend. You can no longer shrink yourself to fit the lie. You are faced with a version of them that no longer allows you to be blind. Disrespect becomes the final mirror, the undeniable proof, the moment where truth finally speaks louder than hope. Closure is not something people hand you wrapped in understanding and apology. It's something you create in the silence they leave behind. We're taught to believe that closure comes in the form of final conversations, honest explanations, or tearful goodbyes. But the truth is, many people will leave without warning, without reason, and without looking back. They will hurt you, disrespect you, and then move on as if you never mattered. And in that absence, in that gaping hole of unanswered questions, you're left grasping for something to hold on to, some meaning, some conclusion, some closure. But waiting for closure from the person who broke you is like waiting for a fire to put itself out. The more you chase it, the more it burns. The hardest truth is this. Some people will never give you closure because doing so would require them to take responsibility. It would mean admitting they caused damage, that they acted selfishly, that they walked away when they should have stayed, or stayed when they should have walked away. With honesty, it would force them to confront the consequences of their choices, and many simply don't have the emotional maturity or the integrity to do that. So they ghost, they lie, they deflect, or they pretend you never existed. And while you're left sifting through the wreckage, trying to piece together what went wrong, they keep living their life unbothered, detached, and distant. That's where the shift has to happen. That's where your healing begins, not when they offer answers, but when you stop asking them to. Because closure isn't about getting clarity from them. It's about finding peace within yourself. It's about deciding that you don't need their validation to move forward. You don't need their confession to begin healing. You don't need their voice to end the chapter. Their silence can be your answer. Their indifference can be your clarity. The way they left, the way they treated you, the way they refused to acknowledge your pain, that is your closure. But it takes strength to accept that. It takes courage to let go without an apology, to move forward without understanding why. We're wired to seek resolution, to wrap things up neatly, to feel like we've come full circle. But some endings are messy. Some chapters close with confusion and pain. And you have to choose to close the book anyway. You have to choose to stop rereading the same page, hoping it will end differently the next time. That's what creating your own closure looks like. It's saying, I may never know why, I may never hear what I needed to hear, but I still deserve peace. It's not about being okay with what they did. It's not about pretending it didn't hurt. It's about refusing to let the pain write the rest of your story. It's about taking your power back from the people who left you powerless. When you stop seeking closure from them, you begin to reclaim control. You start shifting your energy from trying to understand them to trying to rebuild you. You stop analyzing their behavior and start healing your heart. That shift is subtle, but it's everything. Because as long as you wait for closure from them, you are still bound to them. But when you create it yourself, you are finally free. Creating closure means making peace with the unanswered questions. It means accepting that some people are not meant to stay. It means realizing that the way they exited your life says more about them than it does about you. You're not unlovable because they left. You're not broken because they couldn't see your value. They didn't fail to love you because of who you are. They failed because of who they are. And once you truly believe that, the healing begins. Not all at once, not in a perfect linear path, but slowly, quietly, deeply. You begin to forgive yourself for holding on so long. You begin to see that needing closure was only a reflection of how deeply you felt, not how weak you were. You don't need their apology to begin again. You don't need their explanation to let go. Closure is what you give yourself when you finally decide that their chapter in your life is over, not because they said so, but because you did. That's the real ending. Not when they walked away, but when you stopped looking back. Respect isn't proven through someone's words. It's shown in how they treat you when you have nothing to offer them, when you're not convenient, when you're no longer giving more than you're receiving. It's easy for people to act kind when things are going well, when they benefit from your presence, when your energy is feeding their ego, or your love is serving their comfort. But real respect is tested in the moments when you set a boundary, when you say no, when you start asking for your needs to be met too. That's when the mask slips. That's when their true regard for you is revealed. Because someone who truly respects you won't suddenly treat you like a problem just because you stop being easy to manipulate. Disrespect is loud, but it's also subtle. It's not always about shouting or name calling. It's in the eye rolls when you speak, the interruptions when you're expressing yourself, the way they downplay your achievements or mock your dreams. It's in the sarcasm that stings, the silence that punishes, the lack of support when you need the most. And these small moments add up. They chip away at your sense of worth until you start believing you deserve less than you do. You question your standards, your emotions, your instincts. You shrink so you don't disturb their comfort. And before long, you're trapped in a dynamic where you're always trying to earn the bare minimum of human decency. But there comes a point when something in you snaps, not in rage, but in awareness. You begin to notice the imbalance. You begin to see that respect shouldn't be something you beg for or constantly prove yourself to receive. You realize that every time you excused the disrespect, you were teaching them how to treat you. You thought being understanding would win them over, that love would change their behavior. But what you were actually doing was allowing the cycle to continue. Because people don't learn from what you preach, they learn from what you permit. There's a painful moment of truth when you realize that someone who truly cares about you would never put you in a position where you have to question your worth. That love should not require you to diminish yourself, that respect is the foundation, not the reward. And if someone only treats you well when they're getting their way, then it's not real. It's transactional. It's manipulation dressed up as affection. And staying in that space will slowly convince you that you need to earn what should be freely given. You deserve more than tolerance. You deserve someone who listens without dismissing, who supports without resentment, who sees you as an equal, not an asset. Respect means they hold space for your voice, not just when they agree with you, but even when they don't. It means they value your boundaries, not as obstacles, but as expressions of your self-worth. It means they apologize when they're wrong, not because you demanded it, but because they care enough to acknowledge your pain. And when you realize someone isn't capable of that, you don't owe them more chances. You owe yourself an exit. The power lies in your decision to stop participating in spaces where respect is conditional. The more you honor yourself, the less you'll tolerate the subtle jabs, the emotional distance, the passive aggression that once seemed normal. You'll stop over-explaining, stop defending your needs, stop justifying your worth, because self-respect becomes louder than your desire to be accepted. And once that shift happens, their behavior no longer breaks you, it reveals them. You've stopped asking why they treated you the way they did and start asking why you stayed as long as you did. Not to shame yourself, but to awaken. Growth happens when you stop negotiating your value, when you understand that disrespect isn't a mistake. It's a message. It's life showing you that this is not your home, that this relationship, this environment, this connection is not aligned with the respect you're meant to receive. You don't need to fight to prove you deserve better. You just need to choose better. Because respect doesn't have to be earned through pain. It's something that flows naturally in real love, in healthy connection, in mutual appreciation. And once you raise your standards, you'll find that the people who truly belong in your life will never make you question your dignity again. Walking away from disrespect is not weakness. It's strength in its purest form. It's a bold declaration that you know your value, that you refuse to settle for treatment that chips away at your identity, and that you're no longer willing to stay in places where you are only tolerated instead of appreciated. Society often glorifies endurance. Stay strong, stay loyal, keep fighting for people, prove them wrong. But there's a strength that's even more powerful than enduring toxicity. It's the courage to release it. The moment you decide to no longer beg for respect, for kindness, or for decency is the moment you take your power back. Because walking away isn't giving up, it's growing up. It's recognizing that your peace is more valuable than their presence. Most people don't walk away because they're done loving. They walk away because they're done hurting. They've cried all the tears, held all the hope, given all the second chances, and exhausted every part of themselves trying to make things right. They stayed through confusion, through broken promises, through long nights of silence and cold words. But eventually, the heart that loves deeply also learns. It learns that no amount of love can make someone respect you. It learns that staying for potential doesn't protect your peace. It learns that being loyal to someone who keeps breaking you is not loyalty to yourself. And in that realization, strength is born, not the loud, aggressive kind, but the quiet, resolute kind that says, I choose me now. It's not easy. Walking away from someone you love or once trusted feels like tearing your own soul apart. You question yourself endlessly. You wonder if maybe you were too sensitive, too demanding, too much. That's what disrespect does. It distorts your self-perception until you start carrying the blame for someone else's behavior. But once the fog clears, you begin to see that leaving wasn't betrayal, it was protection. You weren't abandoning anyone. You were finally rescuing yourself. You were finally putting your needs, your healing, your sanity first. And that shift is life-changing because it means you're no longer driven by guilt, but guided by wisdom. People will criticize you for walking away. They'll say you gave up too soon or that you didn't fight hard enough. But those people don't know what it's like to carry the weight of unspoken pain. They don't know how many nights you stayed up trying to fix what someone else kept breaking. They don't know how many times you swallowed your voice just to keep the peace. Walking away may look like surrender to them, but for you, it's the brave choice to stop pouring into a cup that only leaks. It's the conscious decision to prioritize your soul over their opinion. And here's the truth. When you walk away from disrespect, you don't just leave a person behind, you leave behind the version of yourself that tolerated it. You grow into someone stronger, wiser, more self-aware. You begin to rebuild your confidence, piece by piece. You start to realize that love shouldn't come with conditions that destroy you. Respect shouldn't be a reward for suffering. And the right people, the ones who genuinely care, won't make you earn basic human decency. They won't confuse control with love or use silence as punishment. They will communicate, they will support, they will uplift. But to make space for those people, you have to release the ones who couldn't show up for you. Walking away is not about bitterness. It's about boundaries. It's not revenge. It's recovery. It's not pride. It's self-preservation. And if people don't understand that, they were never meant to walk with you into the next chapter. The truth is, your future cannot begin until you make peace with your past. And sometimes the only way to do that is to close the door with no explanation, with no final words, with no drama, just silence, just peace, just you choosing to start over without the weight of someone else's disrespect dictating your worth. When you choose to walk away from what no longer serves you, you give yourself permission to rise. You no longer define yourself by how much pain you can endure, but by how much joy you're willing to seek. You no longer live in reaction to someone else's treatment. You move intentionally, you speak boldly, you love yourself fiercely. That's what walking away from disrespect does. It unlocks the part of you that forgot you had options. It reminds you that healing isn't about returning to what broke you. It's about moving forward to what frees you. Sometimes the people who hurt you the most are the ones you trusted the deepest. That betrayal doesn't just sting. It shakes your entire foundation. When disrespect comes from someone you loved, someone you let into the most fragile parts of your soul, it cuts differently. It's not just about what they said or did. It's about what it broke inside you. The disappointment, the confusion, the silent heartbreak that follows doesn't just linger, it reshapes you. And that's when you learn one of life's most powerful and painful truths. Pain is often the greatest teacher. The very people who disrespected you become the reason you wake up, stand up, and grow stronger. They ignite the fire in you that self-love alone sometimes can't spark, not because they deserve to play that role, but because their disrespect revealed everything you needed to unlearn. You never intended to become cold, guarded, or distant. You were just tired of giving warmth to people who responded with ice. You were exhausted from being the one who always tried, always forgave, always gave the benefit of the doubt. Over time, that kind of giving drains you. And it's not because you're weak or overly emotional. It's because you cared too deeply in a world that often rewards indifference. You kept believing that love could fix things, that loyalty would be enough, that if you just held on a little longer, things would change. But eventually, the constant one-sided effort becomes a burden. And when the disrespect keeps returning like a cycle, you start asking questions not about them, but about yourself. Why do I stay? Why do I keep allowing this? Why am I the one always left in pieces? That's the awakening. That's the moment when the pain becomes fuel. You stop trying to change them and start changing you. You realize you've been showing up for people who wouldn't even notice if you disappeared. You've been loving people who only knew how to take, who saw your kindness as a weakness and your forgiveness as permission to keep hurting you. And in that brutal clarity, you find your turning point. You start to build walls, not to keep people out, but to protect what's sacred in you. You learn to say no, not out of anger, but out of wisdom. You stop explaining yourself to those who never listened and start healing the parts of you that believed you had to prove your worth to be treated right. This is where your strength truly forms, not in avoiding pain, but in transforming it. You take the disrespect and turn it into resolve. You take the heartbreak and use it to fuel your rebirth. Every tear becomes a reminder that you deserve better. Every moment of silence after betrayal becomes a lesson in who really matters. You stop chasing closure, stop begging for love, and start pouring into the most important relationship you'll ever have, the one with yourself. You remember who you were before they convinced you that you were too much, too needy, too sensitive. You reconnect with your own voice, your own needs, your own power, and you don't apologize for it anymore. Growth through pain is not glamorous. It's not a straight path or a feel-good journey. It's raw, it's lonely, and it tests every part of you. But it's also real, and real growth, the kind that lasts, comes from real wounds. Not surface-level discomfort, but deep emotional scars. And those scars become your strength, not because they make you hard or bitter, but because they remind you what you overcame. They remind you how resilient you are, how much you endured, and how far you've come from that version of yourself who used to accept crumbs and call it love. Eventually, the very memory of their disrespect becomes a turning point. Not something that keeps you stuck in resentment, but something that pushes you into alignment with your worth. You look back, not with longing, but with clarity. You no longer miss them, you thank them. Not for the pain, but for the lesson. Not for the hurt, but for the growth. Because without their disrespect, you might have never woken up. You might have kept settling, kept shrinking, kept silencing your needs for the sake of keeping peace. But now you've changed. And the person you're becoming is someone who no longer trades peace for connection, who no longer compromises dignity for closeness. That transformation began the moment you stopped asking why they disrespected you and started asking why you ever accepted it. There comes a time when silence speaks louder than any confrontation ever could. It's the moment when you stop reacting, stop explaining, stop defending yourself to those who never cared to understand you in the first place. You begin to see that not every battle deserves your energy, not every insult needs a response, and not every person who disrespects you deserves your presence. The greatest power you can exercise in the face of disrespect is not in proving your worth, but in walking away from the need to prove anything at all. When you stop trying to convince people of your value, you make room for those who already see it. That's the strength in silence. It removes you from chaos and places you in control. It doesn't scream or argue. It simply chooses peace over pride, growth over ego, and dignity over drama. When you've been hurt enough times, you realize that engaging in conflict often fuels the same cycle you're trying to escape. Disrespectful people feed off your reaction. It gives them a sense of power, a false victory. But when you go quiet, not out of fear, but out of self-respect, you take that power back. You're no longer playing their game. You're not begging for closure, for understanding, or for change. You're simply rising above. You learn that healing doesn't happen through retaliation. It happens through removal. And the more you focus on your peace, the more you detach from the chaos that once consumed you. Your silence becomes your boundary, your declaration that you will no longer participate in disrespect disguised as communication. People who are used to controlling you through guilt or manipulation will be shocked when you stop responding. They expect you to fight, to plead, to try and fix things, even when you're not the one who broke them. But the more you evolve, the more you understand that engaging with people who refuse to grow only pulls you backwards. It's not your job to make them see your side, to change their behavior, or to awaken their conscience. That's their journey. Yours is to protect your energy, your heart, your mental well-being. You can't heal in the same environment that wounded you. And sometimes the only way to protect your peace is to leave silently and never look back. Silence is a decision. It's choosing not to beg someone to treat you right. It's realizing that your presence is a gift. And if someone fails to honor it, they don't deserve access to it. You begin to realize that not everyone deserves a seat at your table, not because you're better than them, but because you've worked too hard to love yourself again to allow them to destroy that progress. You stop inviting disrespect with your you stop proving your loyalty to people who wouldn't even notice your absence. You let your silence say everything that words no longer can. You let your absence become the consequence of their actions. And in that, you reclaim your self-worth. It's a painful truth to accept that some people only respected you when they thought you needed them. But the moment you walk away, they realize you were the one adding value. And while they may try to pull you back in to lure you with apologies or empty promises, you've changed. You're not the same person who would accepted breadcrumbs just to feel seen. You're not the same person who needed their validation to feel enough. Your silence isn't weakness, it's wisdom. It's knowing that peace is too expensive to be traded for attention. It's knowing that real respect doesn't have to be begged for. It's shown, it's earned, and it's mutual. Silence also creates space for healing, for reflection, for rebuilding yourself on your own terms. When you stop allowing toxic voices to occupy your head, you make room for your own voice to grow stronger. You start hearing your intuition again. You remember your worth, not through someone else's validation, but through your own internal dialogue. And in that stillness, you begin to trust yourself again. You begin to forgive yourself, not for what they did, but for the times you stayed when you knew you were being disrespected. That's part of the growth too. Not hating them, but learning from them. Not seeking revenge, but seeking release. Silence gives you that. It helps you move on without bitterness. It helps you evolve without explanation. It teaches you that the most powerful thing you can ever do is stop giving access to people who misuse it. Because the moment you choose silence over chaos, you begin to hear your soul speak. And it always tells the truth. When you experience disrespect, the natural instinct is often to seek validation, to get an explanation, an apology, or some form of closure that makes sense of the pain. But what if the real closure doesn't come from the person who hurt you, but from within yourself? What if the key to healing isn't in waiting for the disrespectful individual to realize their mistakes, but in acknowledging that your peace is worth more than their apology? Disrespect, no matter how deep it cuts, can become the very catalyst for closure. When you shift your perspective, the moment you stop waiting for someone else to give you the answers or recognition you need is the moment you free yourself from the chains of their behavior. Closure doesn't always come neatly wrapped in apologies or explanations. It comes from releasing the hold that someone's actions have on your emotions and accepting that you owe it to yourself to move forward with or without their acknowledgement. A common misconception is that we need others to validate our worth. We believe that if someone disrespects us and doesn't apologize, it means we're somehow incomplete or unresolved. We tie our sense of self to their recognition, their acknowledgement, or their apology. But in truth, those things don't heal you. They only temporarily ease the pain. The real closure comes from within. When you reach a point where you no longer need them to understand or apologize, you realize that their actions were not a reflection of your worth, but a reflection of their character. You begin to recognize that your self-respect doesn't depend on anyone's validation but your own. You are the keeper of your own peace, and no one has the power to take that from you unless you allow them to. The pain of disrespect often lingers because we feel we've been wronged. And in a sense, we have. But holding on to that pain only gives the person who hurt you power over your present and your future. You become emotionally tied to them, hoping they'll come back and make things right. But when you stop waiting for them, something powerful happens. You realize that your happiness doesn't rely on them. Your peace doesn't rely on their apology. Your ability to move forward doesn't rely on them acknowledging their mistakes. You begin to see that the most important person to validate you is you. You don't need them to apologize because you have already forgiven yourself for allowing the situation to take place. You don't need their approval because you've recognized your own worth. This is the moment when you reclaim your power, when you realize that closure is an inside job. As long as you are waiting for someone else to give you closure, you are still tied to the past. Your emotional state is still dependent on their behavior. But the second you decide that you will move on, regardless of what they do, you take back control. You decide that you are no longer going to be the victim of their actions. Instead, you choose to be the author of your own story. Disrespectful people will always exist, and you cannot change them. What you can change is how you respond to them. When you stop needing closure from them, you start creating your own closure. You acknowledge the pain, accept it, learn from it, and then let it go. The lesson is learned, the chapter is closed, and you are free to move forward. The process of closing that chapter is not about forgetting what happened or pretending it didn't hurt. It's about recognizing that while you cannot change the past, you have the power to shape your future. It's about accepting that some things aren't meant to be fixed or resolved. Some relationships, some situations, and some people are not worth the emotional investment required to continue. Sometimes the greatest closure comes from walking away accepting that you did your best, and knowing that it's not your responsibility to fix what was broken. This shift in mindset is freeing because it stops you from living in a cycle of waiting for something external to validate your emotional experience. Closure isn't something you wait for, it's something you create. When you make this mental shift, you stop giving your power away to those who have disrespected you. You stop placing the burden of your happiness on people who didn't care to protect it. You stop allowing your life to be dictated by the actions of those who have no intention of making things right. Instead, you choose to close the chapter on your terms. You let go of the emotional weight that disrespect has carried, and you move forward knowing that you are worthy of better. You understand that your worth is not defined by how others treat you, but by how you treat yourself. And in that realization, you find the real closure, the closure that comes from knowing you no longer need anything from them to heal. You've already healed yourself. There's an undeniable strength that emerges when you stop trying to convince others of your worth. In a world that constantly demands validation from external sources, be it people, achievements, or possessions, it's easy to fall into the trap of believing that your value depends on how others see you. Disrespect often breeds a desperate need for validation. You seek approval from those who hurt you, believing that their acknowledgement will somehow ease your pain or prove that you deserve respect. But the truth is, real respect comes from within. It's the moment you stop needing others to recognize your worth that you truly find your strength. You stop giving away pieces of yourself to people who never cared to value what you had to offer in the first place. When you continuously seek validation from others, you give them control over your emotional state. You rely on their words, their actions, and their opinions to dictate how you feel about yourself. But the moment you stop seeking that external validation is the moment you regain your power. You stop placing your happiness and sense of self-worth in the hands of those who don't have the capacity to appreciate or understand you. You stop seeking approval from people who will never see your value, and instead start recognizing that your value is inherent. It is not tied to anyone else's opinion of you. It is not contingent on how they treat you or whether they apologize for their actions. Your worth is something you own, something you define, and no one has the right to take that away from you. This shift is liberating. It allows you to step out of the toxic cycle of trying to earn respect or explain yourself to people who will never understand. It takes the pressure off of constantly trying to prove your value and replaces it with the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your worth. It's no longer about changing someone's mind about you. It's about knowing that how they perceive you doesn't change the fact that you are deserving of respect, love, and kindness. You realize that their opinion of you is not your concern. It is their problem, not yours. The more you stop seeking their validation, the more you begin to align with your own self-respect. You stop looking for approval, not because you've given up on being appreciated, but because you now understand that the only approval you need is your own. And this doesn't mean that you stop valuing the people around you or that you close yourself off from love and kindness. It simply means that you stop letting others define you. You stop compromising your dignity and peace just to fit into someone else's view of who you should be. Instead of seeking their validation, you begin to validate yourself. You recognize that your worth is not dependent on anyone's recognition. It is rooted in who you are, in the values you hold, and in the strength you possess to rise above the disrespect that others may try to impose on you. By letting go of the need for validation, you create space for authenticity. You stop pretending to be someone you're not just to gain acceptance. You stop altering your behavior or compromising your values just to fit in or to please others. You stop shrinking yourself to make others feel comfortable, and instead, you allow yourself to stand tall in your truth. This authenticity draws the right people into your life. those who appreciate you for who you truly are. When you stop seeking validation, you stop surrounding yourself with people who take your energy and leave you feeling empty. Instead, you make room for relationships that are rooted in mutual respect, understanding, and love. You attract people who value you for who you are, not for what you do for them or how you fit into their narrative. One of the most powerful realizations in this process is understanding that you can't control how others treat you, but you can control how you allow them to treat you. Disrespect only continues if you allow it. When you stop seeking validation from those who disrespect you, you stop accepting their mistreatment. You draw boundaries, not as a form of punishment, but as a form of self-respect. You decide that you will no longer tolerate being treated as anything less than worthy of love, respect, and kindness. You understand that you don't need anyone's approval to feel complete. You are enough as you are. In the end, the act of letting go of the need for validation is an act of self-liberation. It's about reclaiming your power, your peace, and your sense of self. It's about stepping into your full potential without worrying about whether others see it. You don't need anyone's permission to be who you are. You don't need anyone's recognition to feel worthy. The moment you stop seeking validation from others, you begin to validate yourself, and in doing so, you set yourself free.